All right, everyone, finally it's here. The next artist series. I'm excited about this one. This one's for Eric Clapton. Okay, you have to get down the Clapton vibrato. And that's kind of interesting when you look at his hand because he plays like this instead of vibrato like a lot of people do. This is what I do. I do more of the BB King this way. But Clapton's vibrato is a little different. What you need to do is when you play a note, you lift off almost every finger except for the index finger. And here's where you have to make your choice. You can either pull it down or you could push it up. And that's the advantage of this type of vibrato. I call it the floating vibrato because everything's floating. Your hand's kind of floating. So if you pull down, you get a really cool sound. If you push up, you get pretty much the same sound but a different feeling as you're doing it. So the secret is as I'm going to the higher strings, I'm more likely to push up. That's why it's so cool when he plays the first string. A lot of the times vibrato gets weird on the first string with the first finger. So if you pull down, it's going to slide off. That sounds cool too. But you don't want that. What you're going to do is you're going to have the ability to press upward. When I say press, don't think I mean push into the guitar. I don't mean that. As you know, all you need is the rail. So the actual fret and the string to touch. And then you have a nice rail to ride up and down. So that would be slow motion right there. Just like that. Okay, I played a lot of Clapton incorrectly, and a big part of it is that when you go to do power chords, a lot of people think, for example, the song Cocaine. That's what a lot of people do, including myself for a long time. But if you really listen, there's going to be the full sounding chord in there. So you're going to actually have the third interval. So keep in mind when you're doing a power chord, let's say on the 7th fret of the 5th string, which is E, if you bar your ring finger across, you're going to hit more notes. So interval-wise, you're going to have a root note, a fifth, an octave, and a third interval. This is the key note right here. Hear the difference? So don't forget to add that third interval, very important. Verses. And you might not think that's a big deal, but it really is. If you really hear the color of it, it changes the color of the whole sound. Verses. See how just the power chord sounds a little bit, I was going to say dinky, but I guess that's a good way to describe it. Dinky compared to the other one. Much more full sounding with that third added to it. Okay, the quarter bends are back, so don't forget when you're soloing, especially when you're doing just pentatonic licks, a lot of the times when you hit the 3rd string 12th fret, let's say if you're in E minor pentatonic, get that little scoop in there, okay? It really adds feel. And I use that if I'm hitting the G right here, 3rd string 12th fret. If you just hit it straight up and then come down, that's pretty cool, but if you give it a little bit, I call it a quarter bend. Just before you go down, it's a great way to step your way down with feel. Even if it's a couple strings. It's hard to go back once you start doing that to the old way. It just feels lame. So, it's a good feel. So don't forget those quarter bends, and sometimes they even slide into half step bends. If you're really excited. We were playing the intro to Cocaine one time, and I remember learning the exact intro finally, and the fun part is this open trill that he does. So it's this very Jimi Hendrix. So the hard part is actually getting the trill to be strong as you go fast, because sometimes when you're going slow it's easy. But the second you speed up, you start to go lighter because you want to go faster, so it goes like this. Disappears. So you got to get these he kind of does it in a burst. So you got to do it kind of quick like that. So practice keeping consistent as far as the strength goes, or the strength of the sound goes, while you're speeding up. Still has to be there. I found the middle finger is the best one to do if you're doing an open trill. You could try your index finger, but unless you're Stevie Ray Vaughan, that's a really tough thing to do. But it's a good thing to practice, so don't neglect it. The reason why the cocaine solo is so cool, in my opinion, is he takes up a lot of space with just a little bit of technique. So the Unison Bends are back. They're going to come back a couple times in the CLAPTON series, but it's a great thing to add to your solos, as you know from the other artist series I've done, just to make things sound bigger. You're creating crazy frequencies when you do this. So let's go to the E minor pentatonic. We're going to go to the 2nd string 12th fret. That's our main note, B. We're going to go to the 3rd string 14th fret. We're going to bend that up a whole step. So we're going to put those together and you get this. Hear that? So you're bending the A up to a B while holding a B, and it's creating that real dissonant sound at first until it comes together. If I give it a little more gain, which cocaine doesn't have a lot of gain, but just to show you. Hear all that crazy noise? It's a good thing. Move it around. Get into some Jimmy Page there. But don't neglect those unison bends. They can really rescue you if you really got to take up space, especially if you're a single guitar player, okay? If you ever want to have fun and you're recording by yourself or playing with another guitar player, just have them break off into another solo while you're soloing. And this is at the end of the cocaine solo, where Clapton's doing his thing, and then there's an overdub of another solo. And this is sort of what Tony Iommi does too. And it's a really cool sounding thing. It takes up more space if you do it this way. It just makes it kind of confusing to listen to, but it's cool if you just think of it as a wall of sound. So one person will just be like, What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another guitar over the top of this just to give you the idea in post-production. But let's check it out. 3, 4. Okay. Gives you the idea. Clapton has a lot of funky rhythms that he throws out there, and one guitar during a couple of his songs, but we'll go back to the cocaine song. There's actually, that'd be funny if it was called the cocaine song. There's a part where there's some muted strings, and then 12th fret, 12th fret, 12th fret. So it's a great sound if you're like the second guitar player or the third guitar player and you just want to do something percussive yet musical. Just bar your first finger across the 3 strings, 1st, 2nd, 3rd strings at the 12th fret in this case. It's playing off that E tone. And then what you do is whenever you want the strings to be muted, you just lift the pressure off your index finger and just mute. So you get this kind of sound. Be careful when you're muting at the 12th fret area because you know you're going to get like a harmonic if you're not careful. Which sounds great, but you don't always want that. So to avoid that, use a couple fingers to mute. So it's really dead, okay? Remember, don't push the strings. Don't not push the strings, if I may use terrible English. But just enough to kill the strings. And you could tell just by experimenting. So if I were to go like this, and then fret it, you could see the difference. So my right hand can keep going. So you notice how my thumb's muting, my fingers are coming off every time I want to use them. That's stuff that happens without you even knowing what's going on once you master it. They just do it by themselves. Let's take this classic riff and kind of break it down. Great sound, right? Now, these are syncopated rhythms, and that means when you're counting beats, there's a downbeat, there's an upbeat. If you studied our rhythm course a little bit, you know there's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and the more you hit those ands, the more you can call it a syncopated rhythm. So the syncopations happen when you walk down from the 12th fret to the 10th fret on the A string here. Listen how it changes. That's all downbeat, pretty much. And then we're going to really focus on those upbeats, the syncopated beats. Gives it a bouncy feel for a second until it settles back down. All right, it's a great way to develop riffs, is to kind of throw in that syncopation sometimes. Makes it a lot more fun to play and a little more interesting sometimes. Adding a third to a power chord creates a full chord, so sometimes you could just do that. A fun way to do that, we did that earlier with the business, but we're using the second form. But if you ever want to do that on the 6th string, let's say you're thinking of the 4th form, well, let's just do a D power chord on the 6th string, so that's 10th fret, 12th fret. Let's say you're doing something like that. Now we're going to skip a string, so we're going to mute the 4th string. We're going to go to the 3rd string, put our middle finger down at the 11th fret. So we're going to end up with this. D, A, that's our power chord, dead string, and then our middle finger is going to play right here, the F sharp. So now we have, gives it a different tone, doesn't it? So if I can keep that 4th string muted, you're going to strum through 4 strings, but you're only going to get 3 sounds, okay? So you get this. Hear the difference? Versus, once again, adding a third, but this time it's in a different situation. It's on the 6th string, so the 4th form version of adding a third. Of course, Clapton's the master of bending. So sometimes when he's bending, he'll do full step bends, which when you measure it, it's 2 frets. Half step, 1 fret. Step and a half, 3 frets. Even 2. This guitar is funny because it barely gets to 2 and then it just stops. There's no way I'm going to go further than that unless I want to break something, my finger or the string. All right, so in one of these examples, he's going to be bending a whole step and then he just throws it up to 2 steps and then plays around after that with a couple different ones. So here's an example. So that's a combination bend where you do 1 step and then you do 2 steps all in one bend. I had to add a little compression to my playing to get some more sustain, but you get the idea. So this is a very common thing that blues players like to do. They like to take the minor pentatonic scale and add the major third, and it just gives it a really rounded sound, and it kind of gives it sort of that, a little bit of that positivity inside of the blues. So you get this. Hear the difference? So if you play D minor pentatonic, and I get to this middle area here, the 10th fret and the 12th fret, if I just reach up and hit the 11th fret with my middle finger, that's the major third. Throwing that in there is a classic Clapton move. Versus, see, it's a little more bluesy if you don't use it, but adding it is just kind of satisfying in a different way. It's the only way I can explain it. It's like going. So that sound of the minor third going to the major third is huge. It's there too. There it is again. It keeps coming back. So try to sprinkle that major third in there and you'll be surprised what you could do with it. If you like to do double stops, which if you're in the minor pentatonic, you can't help but do it sometimes, where you bar your first finger across. Here I'm just across a couple of sets of 10th frets, so at the 5th and 4th string. That sounds great. If you were to just hammer on the 12th fret of the 5th string while still hitting those 2 strings, you get what I call the Hendrix Hammers. Just sounds so musical, doesn't it? So if you move that around the pentatonic scale, we're still in the D minor pentatonic. But once you start getting into the middle strings, if you want to add this little hammer on, it's a great way to fill up some sound. Important though, if you look at my first finger, that's barring 2 strings, and then you're hammering on the lower string, if you will. I know physically that doesn't look like it's lower, but it's the 5th string while I'm barring across the 5th string and the 4th string, okay? You're only hammering on the 5th string in this case. But if I go to the middle 2 strings now, the 4th and 3rd strings, barring, I'm only going to hammer on the 4th string. Put those together. You can even go to the 2nd string and the 3rd string. It's a little wilder sounding. All right, let's do some CLAPTON motifs. Some people hate that word, but that's what I'm using. It's just a repetitive pattern that you could use in different situations. And some of these he's using wah pedal in, which make them sound even better. The first one's just a second string 18th fret to 15th fret pull off. Then we're going down to the 17th fret of the third string. So you get this nice 3 pattern. Now I'm going to add a little compression and wah. So that's a classic sound right there. Another real common motif is the hammer-on in 3s going the other direction. So let's say now we're at the 13th fret, C, up to the 15th fret, D, and we're going to hammer on, but then we're going to hit the first string, 13th fret, in a circular fashion. Some people think you have to separate that by rolling your finger. But when you're going really fast, that's almost impossible. So what I recommend is keep it barred and just let it rip. Now they don't have to be circular riffs, even though this next one seems a little bit circular. This one kind of has a pause in it. But we're back in D minor pentatonic. If you just do a quick hammer-on pull-off on the third string, 10, 12, 10, and then land on the 4th string 12th fret, you get this really cool. So you're basically stabbing it. Diddle-a-did, 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 like that. Sounds like Wayne's World. So you get that. I call that a motif because it's a repetitive pattern. It sounds great. So you can start to put these motifs together. You know, if you want to do them all in one scale, that's a great thing to do. So let's take the first one we did. The first thing we did was way up here at the 18th fret. Let's go ahead and try to do all 3 motifs in one area now. Pretend you're soloing over Sunshine of Your Love. So we'll stay in D minor pentatonic. First one would be... I'm not going to reach way over there to my wah pedal, by the way, so it's going to sound like that. The next one that we're going to do is going to be here. So I took that upwards motif idea and just brought it to the middle 2 strings. And then the final one. Now, if you just go crazy and learn 1,000 motifs, you could solo like a monster. And that doesn't mean you're going to be musical necessarily, because it's not really coming from a place of creativity, but at least you're going to be making some awesome sounds. And who knows, you could twist them up a little bit to make them your own, and who knows, you could be very creative with them. I call this one the Stones lick, even though a lot of people have used this. And this is just an example of utilizing bends and the pentatonic shape in a great way. So let's pretend that we're in D minor pentatonic again. We'll just stay up here. So me and my videos, I'm at A minor pentatonic, so D is fun to kind of change it up. So if you were to go backwards, this is a great lick for this. We're going to go to the 3rd string 12th fret, bend it up a whole step. And then we're going to jump all the way to the 1st string 10th fret. Followed by the 2nd string 13th fret. Back to the 12th fret of the 3rd string and bend it again. It's a great way to take advantage of this sound. They use that in Honky Tonk Women, except up here. So we're just doing it in D this time. What I love about this lick is that you can bleed it all together if you want. In clean sound, it sounds very country. With a little overdrive, it just sounds nasty. I really love the sound of frequencies fighting each other, because once you use that, you can tell it takes up a lot of space, kind of like the Unison Bends do. Let's go back to the quarter bends. Instead of using them in the lead situation though, like, let's use them in a more rhythmic situation. So let's say you're doing something like, got my own way to play it, I kind of pluck the string. Once you go down to the C note, which is the 5th string 3rd fret, some people I've seen play this kind of just play it straight up. They go. To me, that kind of takes away from the feel a little bit. Even if it's just a little bit of a bend, quarter or half, it's going to make a difference. Here's the difference. It's kind of like... You know, that riff from ZZ Top? Well, some people go... Whereas I like to put a little tiny quarter bend in there. Hear the difference? So don't underestimate quarter bends. They can make or break your feel, I should say, when you play. If you can't count dotted eighth notes, first of all, we teach all that on the website. If you go to the website section, which is the notation, I just taught dotted eighth notes. And that's huge when you're counting, because you want to count it 1E and 2E and the uhs being the 16th note that usually follows the dotted eighth notes. So when you put that dotted eighth note sound into a lead, it creates a different rhythm that you don't hear very much. So if the rhythm's this, count it out loud, it would be like this. As soon as I hit this note, we're going to start counting. 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E and Clapton uses it way up here. Such an intense sound. There's times when you're doing muted rhythms where you have to go all out and really grab the sound. You become a drummer, basically. Your hand is hitting the strings. In this case, we're going to go from A minor using the fourth form to D major using the second form. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to play the downbeats, the mutes, like that, across all 6 strings. I'm going to lighten up the tension here so that it's just barely touching it. And then on the way up, we're going to play part of the chord. You can just play 2 strings, just parts of the chord, or you could play all 6 depending on where you're at level-wise. Let's go ahead and do all of them for today just so you get the feel idea. So it's... In the actual riff, starts off with an actual part of the chord, and then on the next downbeat, it's the dead X's, if you want to think of them that way, the mutes. And then on the way up, you actually add the pressure to the chord, so you get the sound. On the way down, back to dead. Switch chords. As you switch, you're muting, so it doesn't really matter if you nail the switch totally. Doesn't that just add a ton of feel? If you do this on an acoustic guitar, you really feel it too because of the big body. It sounds like you're hitting a drum. Sometimes we're too tempted when there's a chord progression to play all the chords huge because we usually learn big chords first and it's hard to get away from them. So in this progression, you could just go... There's something really cool about breaking it up and doing some interesting things with the notes within the chord. So in this case, there's a C followed by some arpeggiations of the notes. Doesn't that just make a more interesting C instead of just going... You know, you're not always like a campfire player, so you want to sometimes break it up. G, just hit the root note, and then see this B right here? Instead of just hitting that, hammer it on real quick. Maybe a hammer-on pull-off like a trill. What a cool way to break up a chord. Then we go to the A. Instead of playing the full chord, just do some notes within the chord. Then I use the single note idea to walk down to G, to the F, which is the next chord. Play around with a little bit, maybe break it up a little bit. Back to C. There's some weird stuff that he does there. And then there's 2 quarter note chords, which are just the E minor sound to the D minor sound, and then back home. So just a new way to play chords. Break it up a bit, play it 1 note at a time possibly, do some hammers, some pull-offs, whatever. I hear a lot of Freebird in that too. Speaking of Freebird, all these tie together in a weird way. If you were to go up to the 1st string 15th fret, play that as a G, and then take the note right below it. So we're going to go to the second string 15th fret, pre-bend it. Remember what a pre-bend means. We're going to bend it first and then hit it, and then release it. So you hit the high note, pre-bend, let the bent note come back down. But you have to pick it, you have to engage it, and then keep repeating that. Pretty wild sound, isn't it? The way you pick it too, if you do an upstroke first, then a downstroke, the guitar kind of moves and it helps make it happen. Almost looks like I'm using a B-bender or something, but I'm not, I swear. See, I don't have one. Clapton really knows how to build up to a note. And going back to unison bends now, this is going to be a broken unison bend, but a slow one. So that we're going to basically make the C, the first string 8th fret, our main target. But to get to it, we're going to go to the 11th fret of the second string, bend it slow before we arrive at the target note. You could really dig in for that. And by the way, why not finish it off with a little floating vibrato? The hardest part of that bend is not cutting off the note as you move on to the actual first string. That's what's going to want to happen. You got to make it instantaneous. It could take a lot of practice. Sounds even better with a wah pedal. I'm going to do the splits again for you. Something about the wah pedal just sort of brings it to life, covers up some mistakes, but mostly brings it to life. If you really want a wall of sound, sometimes you can actually triple track your guitar. And if you're lucky enough to have 2 other guitar players with you, go ahead and have each person take a part here. Break up a chord, you do some harmonizing, and once you understand your intervals, this makes a lot more sense. But I'm going to play 3 parts, and then I'm going to put them all together in post-production, so hopefully it works out. But listen to how you could take single lines, merge them together, and get a 3-part harmony, call it a riff. Here's the first part. It's hard to break up those notes at the end. Here's the second part. And the third part. I love that. Seems like it wouldn't work, but it does. Let's put them all together now. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Okay, hopefully that sounded huge. Since we're in the pentatonic mood, it's a cool little trick. You just take the pentatonic, and since you know all of the notes, if you're in D, for example, D minor pentatonic, are going to be across the 10th fret, you could use that just to hammer on and pull off from each string to each string. Clapton does a great thing where he does the first part normal. Then the second one, instead of reaching from here to here, so we're A to C, he reaches up to the B instead. He likes to do that. It's Clapton, he can do whatever he wants. A lot of people are afraid to do this, but it's a good practice to play up high. Let's say you're doing some crazy runs up here on the first, second, third strings, and do artificial harmonics. We have a whole chapter on that on the website. But if you were to play artificial harmonics way up here, they're more difficult to grab. But down here, they seem to be a lot easier. Just ask Billy Gibbons, right? But if you play up here, they're more difficult to get because the string's skinny and it's hard to really get the perfect feel when you do it. But just experiment. At first it might sound like this and be dead, but eventually you get a nice blend. Sometimes when you hit them up here, you get a surprise squeak or squeal out of it because it's so unpredictable up here. But don't be afraid to add that pinch harmonic even to high notes. It might be scary at first, but you'll eventually start getting it once you find the right place on the string. That was lucky. 3-part octave. You guys all know this tune. Here's the first octave. Second octave. Then eventually you're way up here for the main lick. But think of how cool this sounds. If you just would have stuck with 1 octave, great, but let's add the octaves to it once again with post-production. 1, 2, 3. People like to separate the solo from the verse, and they shall never cross, right? Sometimes people think that. But during Layla, there's a part where he's playing over the verse, and it decorates it in a great way, fills up some space. And it's just some bends, but they add so much. Imagine the song without this part. So there's a half-step bend right away. Half-step bend. Another half-step bend. I'm improvising the ending, but you get the idea. Soloing over the verse is not something you can't do. A lot of people think there's these hard set rules, but without that, I don't think Layla would have been the same. Just like I don't think it would have been the same without the cool piano thing at the end. Very important. Once again, we're back to Clapton's funky strumming. Now this is more in a reggae feel. And this has a lot of upbeat. Remember we talked about syncopations? Well, the feeling of this is going to be more like this now. This is going to tie together with the next technique as well, but let's just bar across the first 3 strings at the 3rd fret. Use a lot of mutes. Remember how we did that? We just let our other fingers come down and touch the string, and our thumbs over the top protecting the 6th string. Well, you get this for the 1 beat. Then for the next beat, we're going to do actual fretting, and we're going to go like that. So to start off practicing this, let's just do a dead hit. That's all 6 strings, by the way, followed by just allowing those 3 notes to come through. And then go back to the mute. Then you do it again. Then you just basically hit 1 afterwards, like a quick little hit. So it's mute, 2, mute, 1, mute. Once you get it, you start to feel it. Once it locks into the beat, you get the groove. You start to see why a lot of reggae players move like that when they're playing, because it's a lot of that upstroke or that upbeat feel. Okay, let's take that a step further and now just do pure mutes. This is just a percussive effect, okay? So all of it's muted, and we're gonna go like this. Now, being a drummer, I can't help but add that downbeat, but it's not really in there. It's just basically 1 and 2 and 1. 2. See, I can't stop doing it. I want to do this so bad. But that gives you an idea that as a guitar player, sometimes you could just be a rhythm player and just be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. You want a cool effect? This is like a slide, but not using a slide. We're going to add a little reverb to the sound, and I'm going to do a lot of pinky swells with the volume, and I'll hit a note and I'll start bending it, and as I bend it, I'm going to open up the volume so that it gets this nice. You could use a volume pedal as well if you have that. That way you don't have to mess with this, because this could be a little bit of a crazy technique to have to do it every time. So you use your foot instead. But I'm used to using the volume, and I'll even do hammer-ons when I do that sometimes. Like the cello effect. But adding a bend is actually more exciting sometimes, and picking. You just have to remember to pick before you turn up the volume. Otherwise you get like, you can hear the picking. Get rid of the picking. Sometimes you have to play a part that seems like a bass line as a guitar line, and it can really add to it. So if you get like a... I'm sort of mixing two parts together, but you hear the low part. Sounds like something a bass player would do. But if you start to add a couple other notes to it, it opens it up. It sounds like a guitar playing a bass part. I've always liked the sound of Lay Down Sally. I think that's a cool groove. I think a lot of it is because it's so bass-based. When you solo in Lay Down Sally, one time I had to solo, I think, for 5 minutes over this riff. One of the band members had to go to the bathroom. So playing an A minor pentatonic, there's tons you can do there, of course, you know, all the techniques, right? But it's really important to take advantage of the Albert King box, which lives right next to your main pentatonic box. If you could slide up here, lots of sonic power right there, just in those two notes in the Albert King box. Then from there, there's the box shape. So an A minor pentatonic, that's going to be the first string, 8th fret, 10th fret. Same on the second string, 8th fret, 10th fret. And then 9th fret on the third string. You can also use the vibrato. You could use the motifs. Quarter bends. Double stop. Of course, it's easy to go back home after you're done doing that. Just come right back to where you're comfortable. Great place to solo. Nice to kind of slide between the two worlds. Lots more to come on that in upcoming lessons. It's easy to think, once again, that you have to play chords as chords. We already learned in another part of the song to break it up with some pretty interesting stuff. You can also just do normal arpeggios. So take, for example, Wonderful Tonight. You could do the chords as bar chords, and you could play them a certain way. Let's say you do something like, so you broke up the G a little bit. If you know your forms, that's the 4th form in G. Then we walk down to the 1st form in D. You could even bar across and do something like that. C chord using open C. And back to the 1st form D, which if you don't know your forms, it's going to be a little difficult, but it looks like this. We're just playing the high end of it. And back to the G. So I talked about don't call things easy. Some people think that the song goes. Yeah, that's the campfire rhythm part, but adding all that stuff is the texture that was actually in the real song. Not to mention the lead part, but that's the rhythm section right there. We don't focus a lot on fingerpicking when it comes to a lot of these artist series, but there is a really cool pattern that Clapton does in Promises, and what it is, it's you're taking a G chord. It's the old-fashioned G with the one finger here instead of the two. And what we're going to do is we're going to play the first chord. We can use our fingers now. We're going to strum across. Or if you get really crazy, you can actually just go like this and pluck a bunch of strings. Notice how I isolate certain fingers to certain strings. So I'm going index finger on the 3rd string, middle finger on 2nd, ring finger on 1st. Thumb takes care of everything else. Sometimes I'll move them over for certain things, but a lot of the times I keep them where they're at, all right? So you get this first chord, or strummed, it's fine. The next two notes, this is what makes this pattern interesting. You play the 3rd string to the 2nd string. Then you play a low note with your thumb. So you're gonna go like this. Strum across, 3rd string, 2nd string, thumb on the low string. Then you go to the highest part of the chord, like that. And then we're going to finish by going to the index finger on the 3rd string. So if you put it together, it creates a great pattern. It's chord, 3rd string, 2nd string, thumb, highest part of the chord, and then end on the index finger on the 3rd string. Go to C and follow that same idea. Every finger picking pattern that I've ever learned has something tricky at first, but once you get used to it, it feels right. Kind of like when I was doing Landslide for the first time. It was really tough for my thumb to bounce back and forth like this. And I would have to say in this song with Clapton, it's getting the strum in the beginning and then going right to the third string to second string. It's a little difficult for me. Some people don't like to do full bar chords like this because they don't like to commit all their fingers like that, and they don't want to open their hand up like this. So Clapton, if you watch him, he loves his thumb over the top. We're going to keep our hand in this position so that we don't have to change when we solo. It's sort of a bummer to go from this to this. So let's make a G major bar chord. So this is going to be using the fourth form again. But instead of doing it this way, let's do everything pretty much the same, except wrap our thumb over the top. A lot of people who hate using their thumbs will be a little bummed out about this, but bring your thumb over the top and just play this G right here while holding down the rest of the bar chord, or pretty much the rest of it, except for the first string. Sounds great, right? And it's not as hard on your hand because you don't have to move like this. So some people just prefer this. Let's bring that up to the 5th fret now. This will be A major. Now to go to F sharp minor, I want you to come back to the 2nd fret, keep the same shape. This time though, you have to lift up your middle finger and then bar with your first finger. That is a bummer sometimes to play this feel, but it's worth the payoff. The payoff is worth it, I should say. A major, F sharp minor. See the hand shape there? Some of you guys will say, forget it, that's never gonna work for me, and that's okay, you could still do the old fashioned. This is nice, like I said before, if you want to quickly go to some sort of lick, not have to move your hand around too much, and go right back to it. Don't forget your separated 6th intervals, and in this song, there's a great part that goes. I'm using a couple techniques. I'm using Travis picking, but I don't know if he does that, so I'm not going to teach it as a technique in this song, at least. You could do it still picking everything. Like that, but you'll see my middle finger reach up sometimes to hit that. Now what I'm doing is I'm in A, primarily in this tune, and typically people would take this part of the A chord and just separate it here, and move up like an old blues trick. But Clapton does something very clever. He plays it up here. Here's the 5th form of A. Hopefully you guys know that form. And then you take parts of that, you get a 6th interval, and then you can move that around in great ways. So you end up with this, which is part of the A chord, which works out. You could have easily done what I said before. Now, it might have been too predictable. It's a little more exciting, I think. The rule of thumb, I shouldn't say thumb, but for the middle finger and ring finger in this case, and index finger, you're going to be using them to move around on 2 strings, parallel strings like that, with a string in between them. So what I like to do is keep my middle finger on the 3rd string at all costs. And I like to use my ring finger and my first finger depending on what I'm trying to play, what shape I'm trying to play. So if you're just doing the classic old blues, you see how my middle finger stays there the whole time? That's the important part. There's a cool picking sequence that he does, where I call it double picking. And one time I was in the studio and I couldn't double pick. It was kind of like a Who type riff. It was I just couldn't do it to save my life. I was struggling. So I learned the importance of getting your double picking down. This is a perfect opportunity to do that. Let's mute the D string, so it's dead. But let's go ahead and play the 5th fret of the 3rd string, C, and make that come to life, okay? So what I want you to do is go mute, mute, and then C, C. You could still mute, but palm mute the C, C, like that. So it's going to be a dead mute, followed by a muted set of C's, if you will. The important thing is just to get that picking sequence down. So if it's too hard to do all this muting, you can go ahead and go 7th fret on the D string, and then the same note on the other string. But we're going to go like this. Really nail that double picking. So what I do is I accent the downstroke and just let the upstroke be a reaction to it, or a reflex. So I'm really thinking down, 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 down. The upstrokes happen. happens in Forever Man. Check it out. Just like talking, a good blues player will be able to leave some space. It's like when you talk and then take a breath and then talk again. If you're always talking and you never stop, it gets really annoying. So I'm going to go ahead and play just a few licks. And you'll see if you just kind of stop every once in a while, it gives the listener a chance to digest what you just said. And it also allows for some new creative ideas to come to you. So in this particular song, I believe is in C sharp minor. Give it a rest, right? Another rest. Wah pedal. So that's the concept. Just leave some space here and there. Allow people to kind of digest what you just played. And it seems to be a much better way to express yourself on the guitar than constantly playing and giving no sense of space. I'm really excited about these because I've taught Unison Bends so many times that there's finally a variation on it that's great. So let's just take it up here. Let's go to the first string 12th fret. Typically when you do a unison bend for that, you're going to go to the second string 15th fret and get something like this. But what I noticed Clapton does is he'll actually take that D note, bring it down to C sharp, so that he has to bend it a step and a half to reach that same destination point, which is the E tone. So instead of going like this, he comes back a half step, which forces him to go. See how much higher you have to bend? Now if you do a staggered unison bend, it now becomes... It's much more extreme and you could feel it on your finger when you do that. So that's a great sound. It's a little more of a struggling kind of a sound. There's more feel to it. This one technique was giving me so much trouble because at least in the tab book it was talking about a bend, a pre-bend, and then when you pick you're going to do a downstroke normally. But on the way up, there's a pinch harmonic. And I thought, how do you do a pinch harmonic as an upstroke? So whether the book was wrong, it still taught me a really cool technique, which is, you know how usually you use the edge of your thumb to do an artificial harmonic? Well, instead, take your index finger and just put it closer to the edge of the pick. So when you do an upstroke with that, it creates the same effect. Hear the little pinch harmonic hiding in there. So what you do is if you're holding your pick like this with your index finger sticking out a little bit, you get the downstroke that's normal and then the upstroke that's more artificial harmonic, pinch harmonic. It's so tricky because on the downstroke, you have to pick it with the normal part of the pick. On the upstroke, your first finger has to barely touch the string to get that pinch sound. That one took me a long time to even figure out. What you gotta do is you gotta make it small. You can't do huge strokes because you have to really fit that pick in there. You can really get some cool dressed up chords if you try some new things. And what I like to do, which he does in Tears in Heaven, there's a lot of thumb action going on. But if you were to play, for example, a D chord and just play two of the notes from it, in this case A and D, and wrap your thumb over the top and add an F sharp. It's a cool way to invert a chord. So now we have what's typically a D chord where the F sharp is here. We're playing the F sharp low with the thumb, so you get this different sound. This inversion's huge for interesting chords. Move that up 2 frets. That's going to be E over G sharp. So you've just inverted that chord now too. Sounds like Better Man by Pearl Jam. It's a lot easier than going E and then trying to get the G sharp with a pinky, which a lot of people try to do. That's a bummer on the fingers. As you can see, I just push that up. It's kind of a hard thing to do. And then he does some great stuff where he'll let go. He'll go like this for the F sharp minor, let go of the thumb. Get some different sounds that way as well. A lot more interesting than if he just played big chords. That seems to be the theme of Clapton. Instead of playing huge campfire chords, we're changing it up to make it more interesting. Here's a trick that you cannot not know. And that's whenever you're here, let's say D minor, using the second form, your fingers are already doing the trick. The first finger's playing the first string, 5th fret, A. Your middle finger is playing the F at the second string, 6th fret. Now to make that more interesting, we're going to do the Stevie Ray Vaughan trick. We're going to play those 2 notes, but we're going to slightly bend the middle finger note a quarter bend. Then you can come down to the root note D. It's a great way to get a blues sound out of something that's pretty typical. This. And without the bend, it's not the same. Whether it's a slow bend or a bend every time you pick. I think I used that the first time with Pride and Joy, Stevie Ray Vaughan. It's kind of where I learned that. And anytime there's a blues part and I want to start the solo off in a cool way, I'll jump to that technique. Before we wrap it up, I just wanted to show you some open G tuning because Clapton does that a lot in his tracks. Sometimes it's like the third or fourth guitar, but sometimes it's the main guitar, the slide guitar. So what you do is you tune your E to D. Every time I hear the low D, I think. Okay, then we have the A down to G. The D stays the same. G stays the same. B stays. And then your E comes down to D. So you end up with this sound. And if you don't know open tunings, you're in for a big surprise because I think when I'm 90 or 100, I'm going to just tune my guitar open and just grab a slide and do a lot of this stuff. Sounds great. Just minimal effort, but you get a lot of payoff. You could just use this as a G chord and just strum it. Then he adds sounds great, just as a strummed chord. Then, if you want to, you could just fret across any fret you want. Let's go to the 5th fret. Such a cool way to get the most sound out of your guitar because all the strings are resonating with each other. So this would be a G chord. This would be a C chord. D chord. So if you want to play 1-4-5 blues and just use one finger, you're set. If you want to use your slide, same kind of idea. C to D to open or 12th fret. Either one's going to be a G chord. Add some gain, and then if you're soloing in G, this is a quick little open slide primer. I don't know if that's the right word. But what I do is I don't use a pick when I'm doing slide stuff. Just hover around the 12th fret, and I want you to come at it from below and try different things. You'd be amazed at how it's almost hard to sound bad when you're doing slide with an open tuning. Okay, that was a lot of work, but a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the Eric Clapton Artist Series, and we have a few more coming out. I shouldn't say soon because I make these promises and then I take forever sometimes, but hopefully you enjoyed that one. Hopefully it holds you over. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.